This is Brother Peter with tidbits from the Word. As of late, I've been studying a book of in the year 1972, Evidences That Demand a Verdict. And this book was written and put together by Josh McDowell. I have not followed him through life, but I hear his name. I understand that he has really gone places, but in 72, I got saved. And this book I've got in front of me is from 1972. Put out by then a young man, a very young man. And he writes and puts together a very good book. The historical side of it is well put together. And from sitting here today with a computer in front of me, that I could ask all of the questions and find out the results that he had in this book is astronomically. How he got put all of the information that he put together in a day before the computer is amazing. And all of the men that he quotes and all the people and all the study that was put into it, perhaps by dozens and dozens of people. I would think it quite hard to believe that one man could have read and quoted as many quotes and people that he's read in books that he quotes here, and some of them in a great length. The historians that wrote them, many of them, disqualify the Bible as history. Matter of fact, they would not go to the Bible for any information whatsoever and bypass it in all matters, in all occasions, and completely bypass it. Therefore, the historical facts they have are not according to what the Bible says, but according to the history they know from an evolutionary standpoint, that things just was a big bang and they all happened, and then history came about, excluding God from anything, having no God in sight of their writings or within their writings, only writings of human history. The Bible, at first sight, appears to be a collection of literature, mainly Jewish. But if we inquire into the circumstances under which the various biblical documents were written, we find that they were written at individuals of a space of nearly 1,400 years. And they were written in apologetics. I've studied many behind different people, which I can't quote you the names of these people, that have put books out called apologetics, which is a study of the Bible and the history of Christianity. Not just the Jewish people, they lived by the law up until Jesus, and then Christianity came in. Now, Christianity is where apologetics comes in, and we study it. The writers wrote in various lands. These writers that wrote, some 40 plus authors quoted in the Bible itself, and they're all from various different lands, and they were separated, many of them by hundreds of miles, and many of them by hundreds of years. Yet they all agreed. Some possibly Mesopotamia, the west to Mesopotamia, and Persia, and over in the east, the writers, they had different walks of life, different ranks in life. They were herdsmen, they were soldiers, they were kings, they were legislators, they were fishermen, they were statesmen. People that were part of the court system. There were people that were priests, and there were prophets, and there were rabbis, and there were Gentiles, and they were physicians, not to speak of others whom we know nothing about, that wrote some things in here, and we don't know anything about them. We just know what they wrote. And they include the history, the law, the civil, criminal, ethical, ritual, sanctuary, and the righteous poetry, dramatic, the theaters, lyric. We have lyrical poetry in here. We have parables. We have allegories. I had this friend that I've worked for through the years, and he reads the Bible through every year, he tells me, and he's not a saved man, and doesn't read the Bible as a religious book. He reads it as a historical book, and he said it's nice to read through the history of it. And he reads it as poetry, and he reads it as biological and allegorical, but he doesn't read it as personal. Now, the Bible is a personal book. It has a personal correspondence to every person that looks at it. It is a memorial of God to the Christian. It is our memorial book. In addition, it's distinctively, it has all the prophecies that have come about so far, have none, not any, have failed, not one. They've all come as to now. And that's what apologetics is getting in and finding out what it says. For all the Bible is not, it's not simple, it's not simply an anthology. There's unity which binds the whole thing together. It's not any entity of it is not separate. It all binds itself together. It's all connected from Genesis 1:1 to Revelation 22:21. It is 100% bound together. And it's compiled by anthologists, but no anthologist compiled the Bible. Even though people that analyzed and they were authority of it, they had the knowledge of it and everything and put it together, yet they themselves were not the one that did it. God working through them did it. They yielded their bodies to this type of work. They yielded their minds and their hearts to this type of work, and they put it together. It is the most unique book of books that ever has been or ever will be. There are some statistics. In 1972, where millions and millions of Bibles, actually in 72, the people that give away Bibles had given away millions by that time, by 72. I forgot when they started. I studied all of that, but it leaves me right now. I don't have it in my mind. It's different from all other books. There isn't any book of books. There isn't any sets of volumes of books that could even begin to compare with the Bible. There isn't any volume of books out here that would agree. For instance, the Encyclopedia of Britannica, if you take it in its entirety and all the volumes of it that there is and put them together, you couldn't put it all in one big book and have it agree. It would not agree like the Bible does. The unique of the continuity in the Bible is it's written, actually is written over a period of 1,400 years. It was written in a 1,600-year period, but 1,400 of those 1,600 years were devoted to the Bible. It was written over 60 generations of people. It was written by 40 plus authors. We know of 40 authors in the Bible. And these authors were from different walks of life. Some were kings, some were peasants, some philosophers, some fishermen, some poets, some statesmen, and some scholarly people, on through many different ones of those. Look at Moses. Moses wrote, a political leader. Moses was trained in the University of Egypt, if you would want to put it that way, the universities of Egypt. He was Pharaoh's adopted son, and therefore he got the best of the best of the best education that Egypt could provide. And God took him and used him. And by the way, Moses probably gave up more than any other man in this world ever has given up to follow God. He said, I'm not following this pagan thing after a while. And he left. He would have been the next Pharaoh. And he walked away from that to serve God. And then, let's jump all the way from Moses to the New Testament and see a man called Peter, a fisherman. As a fisherman out fishing on a boat, Jesus comes by and says, hey, you follow me and I'll make you fishers of men. And do you know, Peter had a couple of boats. He had men working for him. He left his boats and followed Jesus. We have back into the Old Testament, again, a man called Amos. Amos was a herdsman. And God called Amos from being a herdsman to follow him. Look at Joshua. Joshua, the book of Joshua. The military general that all generals throughout history have gone to the Bible and studied Joshua. There are probably no generals that have ever been in any of the wars that we know of, as far as we know, for instance, I'm in the United States, as far as we know in the United States, that didn't study Joshua and the military general that he was. Because Joshua had the best teacher there ever was, which was God. And Joshua listened to God, and he fought his military battle according to what God said. And when he didn't win. But when he did, he was the winner. And then we have a man called Nehemiah. Nehemiah, he was a cupbearer for a king. Now Nehemiah was probably stolen away from Israel when he was a young man, 13 and 14 years old, maybe younger, maybe 7 or 8. But he was a goodly man, a goodly boy, and the king saw that they would train him to be a cupbearer. And that's what they did. They trained him to be a cupbearer. And that's what he was to the king. Therefore, he was one of the closest people to the king, by the way, and the queen. And the queen. I don't know of any other place in the Bible where it talks about that a man stood before the king and the king's wife was present. And by the way, and the king's wife spoke. Back in that day, that was an unheard of process. And the king's wife, this Nehemiah was a man that was astute. He had gained the total devotion from the king and the king's wife to him, as well as his devotion to them. And they agreed 100% with him and sanctioned everything he did and gave him great military people to follow him, tree cutters, people to go and to guide him through back to build the walls of Jerusalem. Wow. Daniel was a prime minister. Daniel was a prime minister, yet he was under the authorities that were over him, and yet he was willing to not follow the decree that there was somebody other than the God of heaven who put a 10 commandments. In the 10 commandments, the first commandment was, I would have no other gods before me. And Daniel said, I'm following the God of heaven. I can't put you, king, in the place of God. And didn't. and did that prayer 3 times a day in his window. And those guys that came against him ended up being destroyed. And we saw that. And then we'll jump back up into the New Testament for a few minutes. Luke was a doctor. Now here's a man that had the world by the tail, had life by the tail, Luke. And God called him into the ministry. And he had to leave the ministry he was in to do the ministry that he did. Or we do not know how much of it he used during that period of time. We don't know the in-between the scriptures that were being written by Luke, that what he was doing in a sense of the word. Solomon, back in the Old Testament, David's son, Solomon, was a king, a great king, had asked for the wrong type of wisdom. When he asked for wisdom from God, God gave him wisdom, but he gave him the wisdom of the world. Now, Solomon had spiritual wisdom that he wrote about, but did he follow it himself? No, he didn't. He wrote about it, and some of it he did, some of it he didn't. It was not wise for him to devote his life to women. If you please, Solomon's God was the women that he had. He had too many of them. And it took the place of God and caused him to end up worshiping other gods other than God, the gods of these women. Now jump back into the New Testament, and we've got Matthew. Matthew was a tax collector. He was not a man that was appreciated by most people. And most tax collectors in that day had the stigma on them that they collected more tax than they were supposed to, and they pocketed it, and they were wealthy, very, very wealthy men. And then Paul, a rabbi, he had rabbinical abilities, and we find that some attribute him to being a rabbi. And he was, in the sense of the Old Testament law, he was a Hebrew of Hebrews. He was a Pharisee of Pharisees. So therefore, in the Pharisaical world, he was a rabbi. And he had to be approached in the way that God approached him. And you know, I think this is something that God would take a man that had been out. Do you know that he was responsible for Stephen being stoned to death? He was responsible for many, many people of the Way, which was the first Christian group out, and him destroying as many of them as he could. Excuse me. And he destroyed many, many, many of those people. All right. Now we see the fourth thing that we see in the writing of the Bible is it was written at many different times, all the way from Genesis 1:1 all the way through to Revelation 22:21. It was written in different places and different times. Moses wrote in the wilderness. You know, it was amazing to me that here's a man in the wilderness and he's writing. Where did he get the parchment? Where did he get the feather, the pen, the ink? Where did he get the ability to write? Where did he get the ability to put it on a parchment that wouldn't rot or decay, which would have had to have been an expensive piece of parchment, and to have rolled it up and to sealed it in a jug to where it would not decay, that the air and the weather and everything wouldn't get to it. And another thing is, many of the distresses that Moses was in and many other people, how did they go about writing? Most of them, majority of the people, as I study, I find out, they had a scribe with them, or they had somebody with them. Now Jeremiah was in the dungeon. Who do you think did the writing for Jeremiah? Jeremiah had a steward, that was with him, that tended to him. And Jeremiah had some things that were, but when Jeremiah was in the dungeon, he was in the dungeon by himself. Who went and got the people and pulled Jeremiah out of the well? Why, that must have been his steward that did that. A person that was watching out for him in a big sense of the word. Isn't it nice? Even nowadays, God appoints some of us a steward. I haven't got one in the sense of the word yet. I've been looking and searching for somebody who would come alongside, who would help me with doing some writings, putting some books together, putting some stuff together, and take my place when I go to the grave, and do tidbits from the Word. And so here's Jeremiah. Now we got Daniel. Daniel is out on the hillside, and he's out in different places because he ended up in the palace. But what's written, many of the things that are written of David was written not by David, but written of David. His history was written by others of him being the young man he was, coming out of the field of tending the sheep, where he had learned to play the harp, where he had been with God and been close to God. And they're telling how many times an angel must have came and protected David. He said he killed a lion with his bare hands. He killed a bear with his bare hands. And so he did some feats that only could be done if God was protecting him and doing things. And so Daniel's on the hillside, and he's writing and doing things. And then we come to Paul, the apostle. He wrote from prison walls. He's inside of a prison. Well, here's a man in a prison. How many people do you think were in that prison that were afforded to have some parchment, to have some ink, have a way to write? How many people do you think was so privileged as Paul was? I think from jail to jail, from town to town, from place to place, that the people in the prison system, the guards and the people over the system, and they knew that they were going to have a stewardess guest by the name of Paul, and he was going to be a guest in their prison. And even though he was put there by the royal guard, the guys that ran the prison were not so much persuaded as the royal guard was to put him in there, that that's where he needed to be. And so therefore, when he had a need, they met the need. Man, here's a man that got parchment, got pen, got a scribe. A lot of times Paul had somebody with him. We see that he had different people with him at different times. And then we see a real interesting one. Luke was a traveler. Luke was traveling because he was a physician. Now remember that. I'm suspecting, being a physician, you got some rights that a lot of other people didn't get. Because you could travel, you could actually go and say, look, I'm going over here to Mrs. So-and-so's, and she has a need of a physician. And because he was a spiritual physician also. But I'm suspecting he had some royalties that some others didn't have because of his paperwork, saying that he was a physician. I'm suspecting that the people that would hinder him, once they found out he's a physician, would say to him, hey, I got something right here, would you look at it? Or I got a problem with this arm. Or, hey, have you ever met a doctor and didn't tell him that you had some kind of a problem or something? Isn't that amazing that I like that we do that. So we see here Luke, and then we see John on the Isle of Patmos. Now John did much writing before he got to Patmos, but Patmos was a prison, and it was not a comfortable prison. It was an island, and here you are out there, and these folks saw fit to make sure that Paul had plenty of parchment, had plenty of ink, had plenty of everything to write with. Paul's eyes were kind of dim at that point in time in his life too. Paul had been dipped and boiled in oil, and he had many things. And I'm under the impression that Paul had a scribe, John had a scribe on the Isle of Patmos that helped him to pen down all the things that he had to pen down. And there were others that were involved in campaigns, involved in military campaigns that did writings too. And I can think of several of occasions, but I won't go into them because I don't want to get them mixed up. Now, one of the fifth thing that we see about these writers and about them, David wrote in the times of war. Now he was in a war, being ran out of the country, and had all kinds of problems from the king wanting to kill him. And then Solomon, he wrote in times of peace. And in Solomon's area, it was peace. Do you know that Solomon married a lot of women that he never probably culminated the marriage? A sheik from way off somewhere would come from his piece of land that bordered on Solomon's land. And he knew that the protection he would have if his daughter was one of Solomon's wives. So he would take his daughter over there, and they would go several hundred miles, and the daughter would marry Solomon. And the man would go back home, and now his kingdom was part of Solomon's kingdom. Nobody dared to come in and raid it or do anything to it. This man was under the protection of the great Solomon. And that's why some of them did that, and some of the marriages that Solomon had were now, it was written during different modes. We're talking about the writing of the Bible is what we're talking about. Let's not forget what we're talking about. There were so many different modes of time from Genesis 1 all the way to Revelation 22. There are so many modes of time. For instance, Sodom and Gomorrah, the time of that. The time of the city of Babylon, and the time of the great tower that was built by Nimrod, and the time of the flood, Noah and the ark, and 8 people were saved. It was written in Asia. It was written in Africa. It was written in Europe. And the Bible was written all over the place, over there in the eastern part of the world. There are some heights of joy in the writings, and there are some depths of despair. There are some depths of sorrow. When, for instance, let's just take David. David had committed a sin or two along the way, physically speaking, with his body. He committed some sins that God did not apply against his soul. And in David's passing, God said he was a man after my own heart. David had a heart after God, even though he had a problem with his body at times. And let's see, there was the Hebrew language in the Old Testament. In 2 Kings 18:26-28, it's called the language of Judah. In Isaiah, it's called the language of Canaan. And the Aramaic was the language of the lingo and the influence of the place to where it was written in the Near East until the time of Alexandria the Great. And after Alexandria, he had the New Testament language came about. Now, when we get to the ninth subject thing that we were looking at here. The subject matter includes hundreds of controversial subjects in this sense, that they create oppositions and difference of opinions from different people of different matters in different discussions. And this is why on this particular heading I have history and Bible, because historians have been greatly noted to want to put the Bible on the shelf and not include it in the history of the world, saying that it was a mythical book, or who could believe that there be this man, the Christ, who was God in the flesh? Who could believe that has to be a mythical thing? But if you can ever get a historian to be honest with himself and come to the fact of giving the Bible its credence and study it, he would generally get saved. Biblical authors spoke of hundreds of controversial subjects, and there was great harmony also in the continuity. All the way from Genesis to Revelations, there is harmony. It is an unfolding story of God's redemptive plan, all the way from Adam and Eve, when God sacrificed two lambs and shed their blood and put two lamb outfits on Adam and Eve to cover their nakedness. And that was the first blood sacrifice. God himself killed those lambs and skinned them and dressed Adam and Eve. You say, how did he do that? How did that come about? Well, that's the answer only God can answer. You and I can't answer that one. So we're going to look at the passing of some things, and paradise was lost. Paradise lost. I don't particularly like that particular statement of paradise lost, because I don't think paradise was ever lost. Paradise was there, but it was in the heart of the earth. And in the Genesis, it becomes the paradise regained in Revelations, whereas the gate to the tree of life is closed in Genesis. It is open forevermore in Revelations. Now, this is something that I studied a lot and didn't come to the realization until many years of study, that when Jesus took paradise to heaven, he didn't do away with paradise. There is that place of paradise, that section, to where the Old Testament saints are sitting around a table, 24 of them, and the 12 apostles. And so here we have the 12 heads of the tribes, and we have the 12 apostles that Jesus brought. The 12 chosen by God in the Old Testament, the 12 chosen by Jesus in the New Testament. Now those New Testament saints are actually visiting the Old Testament saints in their paradise, because paradise was in the heart of the earth, and when Jesus took it to heaven and set it down, somehow he kept it in its original condition, and is spoke of in Revelations is that paradise. The human body can only be properly explained in the reference of the whole body, and any part of the Bible can only be properly explained in the reference of the whole Bible. You can only explain the human body. Yes, this is a little finger, but it's joined to the whole body. If I cut this finger off, it will die, and it will not be considered part of the body. And this is the Bible. The Bible is like the little fingers, or the 8 fingers and 2 thumbs you have on your hand, and the 10 big toes, the 10 toes you have that keep your balance, are like the things in the Bible. They all consist together. And just like you're seeing a body that's consisting all together, you're seeing a Bible that's consisting all together. The Bible without its little finger would not be a full Bible. The Bible without its big toe would not be a full Bible. The Bible without its head, which is God the Father, God the Son, and God the Holy Ghost, would not be, in its collection of literature and spirituality, would not be complete without the whole thing. You say that little fingernail, how important is it? I tell you what, you lose one of them, and I've done it. You lose one of them, and you know how important it is. You say, how important are things in your body, Brother Peter? You see, you got a hair in your nose. Close examination of that hair under a microscope, and you'll find out it is one hair with hundreds of little hairs coming out of it. Each one of those little hairs are dust collectors. They keep stuff from going down into your lungs and polluting your lungs. Therefore, every now and then you have to blow your nose and get those dust collections out of your nose. And so every single solitary hair on your body has a use and an importance. And therefore, it's all part of the makeup of the body. You say, we got hair under our arms. Why do we have hair under our arms? God knew when he made man where he needed hair and where he didn't. And God had a various way of doing things for a man or woman that was necessary. Hey, the Bible at first sight appears like a collection of literature, mainly Jewish. And if we inquire into the circumstances under which various biblical documents were written, we find that they were written in individuals over a space of 1,400 years. I read about those individuals already today and how that they were important. And I read also this first thing that I just read right here. I read back in before I started talking about who wrote the Bible and how they wrote it. The conclusion. What is the conclusion of the continuity, the comparison with the great books of the Western world? There is no comparison. The gulf between the Bible itself and all other books is a great gulf. The Bible stands alone. It is a book that stands alone. Even a Muslim has to agree to this. There had to be something about Jesus if the calendar started and BC is before Christ and AD is after divinity. He was divinity. He was divinity. He was God in the flesh. He was the one that walked in the flesh, died, went to the tomb, the grave, rose again, and walked again on the earth and lives forever with the Father. And that's divinity. The representative of God on the earth in the flesh was the body of Jesus Christ, born of a woman, conceived by the Holy Spirit, made by the Holy Spirit, and born of a woman. This, I had a story written by a man back in the 70s that told a story about a salesman that was selling botanicals. And he himself couldn't draw a unique conclusion that anybody that wrote in the Botanicas could agree with the others about many things. And you'll find today, even today, you'll find, it's a funny thing. I have this book sitting in front of me from 1972. I have read paragraph after paragraph after paragraph by historical writers who denounce the Bible. They say the Bible can't be. I mean, we're not going to give it any credence. Oh, we've got it in our stack of books up there, the thing that says Holy Bible, but we're not going to take that book out and give it any credence because we disallow it. And this disallowing of the Bible has brought us today to where we are in 2014. We are here today. As I read and as I study after one philosopher behind the other, their philosophy is, if you can get away with it, do it. If you can get away with it, do it. And if you exclude the Bible, you exclude all morality. That means if you want to take somebody else's wife out or home with you at night, you can do that. Because there's no law that says you can't. Because you don't go by the laws of the Bible. Because you don't believe what the Bible says. You just believe what history says, and what history says is if you can get away with it, get away with it. And we have a White House that is run that way today in 2014. It's run by these people that I'm reading behind that gave the history, and these people that, the Freudians, that have been studied by those people who have gone to college, and now they're in our place in the United States government, and they have waysided the Bible 100%, and God. They even want to take the Ten Commandments out of the White House. By the way, there was a room in the White House, as far as I know that room is still there, and it was a church room. And before they had any session, they had church. And now they don't use the room at all. It's a funny thing that almost all of the critics that I read about in this book that I've been reading, that are critics of the Bible, have never read it. Isn't that amazing? Here they are, full-scale critics of the Bible, and they've never read it. Historians of the history of the world, but leaving out the book of books. And by doing that, they left out the whole Jewish race, as far as God being over the Jewish race. They have I don't see how they can get the history of the Jewish race without seeing God, but they've done it. In Encyclopedia Britannica gives very little credence, if any at all, in any of the book to the Bible and the study of the Bible and the uniqueness of the Bible, and how it is one book by itself. Do you know that in the 50s and the 60s, listen to this, in the 50s and the 60s there were over 3,000 Bible translators that translated the Bible and passed it on. Some 409 million Bibles were given out between 1804 and 1928. 409 million Bibles. Imagine that. And the Gideons passed out 965,000 Bibles in 1928 was when they started. They passed out 965,000 Bibles. Can you imagine that? National Bible Society had passed out in let's see, what year was that? It was in the early 1900s that they had passed out 88 million Bibles. Hey, the Bible has been the most passed out, the most book all across the nations. And my statistics, I've got a book that I'm reading here that I've studied since 1972, and the statistics in this book ended in 1968 on the Bible, and it ended at 87 million in 1966, 87,398,961 Bibles in 1968. It is the most printed, most passed out, most got around book that there is. You can't go anywhere in the United States of America and not find one. There are other countries, I understand, where you can go and not find one, but you won't go to probably any house. You probably will not go to even the most atheist house in the United States of America and not find a Bible on the shelf. You say, what would an atheist do with the Bible? He's got it there to remind him that he doesn't believe it. But he's got it there so he can remind him he doesn't believe it. Maybe someday God will have him pick it up and show him that what he doesn't believe is actually the truth. The Bible is a memorial in itself. The living Word is a memorial in itself. And it is and always will be the influence and the survival of the Christian people. We have a lesson here coming up that I'm fixing to get into, is how the Bible was prepared. It's not the first time that I've studied a lesson on how the Bible was prepared. Many have questioned about the background of the Bible, about its divisions, about its material, about the way it was produced in its production, about the sections and the framework of it, and how to familiarize yourself with the construction of it, which is important, to familiarize yourself with it, and to give the reader a greater application of God's Word. Now, the only way you get a greater application of God's Word is first you do have to read it. But as you read it, you ask God to open your eyes, your inner eyes, your spiritual eyes, that you might see what it's really saying. The writing of it was originally written on some papyrus. That is some leaves that were hammered together while they're green and wet down and dried and rolled up and then unrolled and rolled up and unrolled and prepared so that they could be long lasting, like parchments, long lasting. Many of the ancient manuscripts that were brought forth, that the Bible was translated off of, were on papyrus. And so it's really basically a perishable material, but kept like they kept them when they put them in a jar and sealed them up and stuff. It kept good. Once they were taken out, though, and put in the air, they began to decay. So they were translated and then put in. Many of our documents from our original Bible are sealed in glass cages with all the air sucked out of them, and they're in a vacuum. And some of these stuff, if you were to bring it right out and put it right in the air, it would just crumble or dissolve. And the only way you can keep it is by doing that. By the way, Patmos was something that was grown in the lakes and rivers in Egypt. And papaya, excuse me. And it was a grass that was grown. And they shipped it all over the place. They shipped it to Syria, to Babylon, to the Greek part of the world that books was made out of. It's been found in many ports in the English-speaking world. We have a thing called paper, which comes from the Greek word papyrus. And they worked at it long enough until they found out that they could make a thing called paper. In the Cambridge history of the Bible gives the account of how Patmos was prepared for writing, and you can go to that. Actually, today you can turn your computer on and go to papyrus and find out what it was and exactly how it was put together and exactly how it was pounded and how it was washed and how it was made and how it was used. And because we have a computer today, we can answer many of the questions. I'm reading in a 1968 book I like old books. I like old books. I have hundreds of books. I have 300 or 400 books. Many of them, you would say, antiquated, but they're not. The words in a book are never antiquated. The words in the book, the older the book, the more truthful I find it to be. The more modern writers that you get behind today write a bunch of theological stuff that is not biblically sound theologically. It is historically sound in a sense, but not biblically sound. Hey, the reeds were stripped and cut lengthwise into thin, narrow slices before being beaten and pressed together into 2 layers. One was set at the right angle and the other at the opposite. And when they dried, they had a whitish surface. It was polished smooth with a stone or other implement. Plenary refers to several qualities of papyrus, and the varying thickness and surfaces are found before the New Kingdom period, when sheets were often very thin and translucent. So as they worked in the old papyrus and in the fragments known to date back 2400 BC, 2400 years before Christ, papyrus was being made to do things. The earliest papyrus, it was difficult for any to survive except in dry areas such as the sands of Egypt, or in caves similar to those like the Omran cave where the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered. Papyrus was enjoying popular use until about the 3rd century. Wow. Until the 3rd century they were using papyrus to, it's amazing, God gave people the intelligence to learn how to do that, and to learn how to, by the way, writing was not always in. I don't suspect Adam and Eve did any writing, and for several hundred years nobody else did any either. So when writing came into being, it had to come into being by some things that had been passed down and then written down. There was a time when people didn't lie. There was a time when the truth was told when somebody talked. Some of the other parchments that were used that were sheep skins, goat skins, antelope skins, and other animals. And these skins were shaved, scraped in order to produce a more durable writing material. Now, I started out as this excerpt here being history and Bible. 2 different things. But even history doesn't give us what the Bible gives us when it comes about the talking of what things were written on, how they were done, and that. All of our early discoveries on what things were done, how they were written on everything, mainly is from Bible study and from going back to the Bible thing and the way that it was put together in the Bible. I've got all kinds of things written about different types of parchments and different places and different things that they wrote on, all kinds of materials and styles and flat wood, and how they were covered with wax and documents, and how things were chiseled but with iron and engraved in stone, which, by the way, the first writing was the 10 Commandments that God wrote in stone. And Moses brought them down, showing that there was an understandable writing in that day that God and man understood. God wrote it and man understood it. So that means that God and man were on the same plane when it came to communications. the communications of God and man. A pointed reed they used for writing, a quill from a narrow feather. There was a reed pen cut out of a piece of like bamboo with a sharp point, and you could touch it on the ink and scribe with it. And the scribes used many things that they scribed with. When the pen was used on vellinium or parchment or papyrus, ink was usually a compound of charcoal, gum, and water. Charcoal, gum, and water. Now this was another thing that we find out. The charcoal made it permanent. The gum and the water just made it where it would flow. But what was left after a period of time was the charcoal. And so that's why some of it lasted as long as it did. The book of Revelations was on a piece of patmos, a piece of material that was 144 feet long. Wow. The average scroll was between 20 and 35 feet long in the Bible times, from the Bible. It's no wonder it said that it took a professional cataloger of a book from the Alexandria Library to rewrite it, to go through it and unroll it and tell you. And by the way, they wrote from back to front, and so it was written different. In the codex or the book form, in order to make it real easier for us to read, in our way, the way we read is from the front to back, and we read in leaf form or page form. One leaf and then another leaf and then another leaf. And some of the first books were written with one-sided page, just written only on one side of the page, and you'd flip it and there was nothing, it was a blank back. Until later on they started using book form of writing on both sides of the page. It's called unical writing, and using capital letters to start out with, or capital letters on some words, or when you wanted to highlight what it was about, you used all capitals and did that. And the regular script was called the smaller letters, which now we call them case letters, the smaller letters. In the 19th century, things began to change and be different. We've got things that we call minuscule writing that we've studied about. Was created when you were doing putting a book together. And this happened in the 19th century, and things have really changed now with your computer, and everything now is basically in print, and just about everything you read is in print. A matter of fact, the other day I heard in school they were talking about trying to do away with cursive, not doing any cursive writing, doing all typescript. And everybody print rather than writes with printing rather than with writing, because they say that the students of today do not know how to read cursive. So we're phasing out a generation or two or three or four here, 3 or 4 generations. We're phasing out what we knew, us older folks, into a completely new thing where we have a generation out here right now that wouldn't understand many of the things we say or do. The language we still use is not the language they use. I can hear teenagers today down at the church house. I hear them talking. I can't understand what they're saying because they're talking in the jargon that's used on the texting jargon is completely different. Talk. than you and I of age know, and therefore we don't understand it. Our time's come and gone. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.